Imagine this. A powerful empire, the land of Egypt, with towering pyramids, golden palaces, and bustling markets, but beneath all that glory lay a dark reality. A people, the Hebrew, trapped in slavery, toiling day and night under the harsh rule of Pharaoh. They cried out to God for deliverance, their hearts burdened with sorrow and suffering. However, God heard their cries, and deep in the shadows of this troubled land, a story of hope began. During this dark time, Pharaoh, fearing the growing number of Hebrews, issued a cruel decree. These Hebrews are becoming too many, he snarled. If we don't stop them, they will rise against us. Therefore, in his cruelty, he ordered that every baby boy born to the Hebrews be drowned in the Nile River. In this oppressive atmosphere, a Hebrew woman named Jochebed gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. Her joy, however, was mixed with fear because Pharaoh had commanded that every Hebrew baby boy must be thrown into the Nile. For 3 months, Jochebed hid her son, but she knew she could not keep him safe forever. With a heavy heart, she wove a basket, waterproofed it with tar, and placed her baby inside. She took him to the Nile and set the basket afloat, her prayers following it down the river as her daughter, Miriam, watched from a distance. As the basket drifted along, none other than Pharaoh's daughter, Bithiah, who had come to bathe in the river, discovered it. She opened the basket and, seeing the baby, felt compassion well up in her heart. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said, cradling him gently. Miriam stepped forward bravely. "Shall I find a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby for you?" she asked. The princess agreed, and with a smile, Miriam ran to fetch her mother. Jochebed returned, and under the care of Pharaoh's daughter, she was able to raise her own son for a time. When he grew older, Jochebed gave him back to the princess, who named him Moses, meaning, drawn from the water. Moses grows up as a prince of Egypt, living a life of privilege, but deep in his heart he knows the truth: he is a Hebrew. Meanwhile, Moses had an older brother who was born 3 years before Moses. Pharaoh's decree to kill all Hebrew baby boys came after Moses was born, which is why Aaron was not targeted at that time. Aaron remains among the Hebrews, experiencing the harsh realities of slavery, but even as a child, he is kind and peace-loving and caring. He is caring and protective of his younger sister Miriam, who often looks up to him with admiration. Despite their different upbringings, the bond of brotherhood connects them in ways they cannot yet understand. One day when Moses was a young man, he went out to see the labor of his people. What he saw horrified him: an Egyptian soldier beating a Hebrew slave mercilessly. The sight lit a fire inside Moses, and in a fit of rage, he struck the soldier down and killed him. Moses buried the body in the sand, thinking no one had seen. Nevertheless, the next day 2 Hebrews were arguing, and when Moses tried to intervene, one sneered, "What, will you kill me too, like you killed the Egyptian?" Moses' heart sank. The secret was out. Moreover, when Pharaoh heard, Moses had no choice but to flee for his life. He ran into the wilderness, far from the palace and everything he had known. There, in the land of Midian, Moses starts a new life as a shepherd. He worked as a shepherd for Jethro, a local priest, for many years. He marries Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, and settles into the quiet rhythm of the desert. He continued to work for his father-in-law, spending his days tending to flock, but deep inside he feels a void, a longing for purpose. Years passed, but even in exile, God had not forgotten Moses. One day everything changes. While Moses is leading the sheep to graze near Mount Horeb, he notices something extraordinary: a bush that is engulfed in flames but is not burning up. Intrigued, he approaches it. Curious, Moses approached. Suddenly, a voice called out from the bush, "Moses! Moses!" "Here I am," Moses whispered, his heart pounding. "Take off your sandals," the voice said, "for the ground you stand on is holy. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt, and I am sending you to lead them to freedom." Moses stares in disbelief. Who am I to confront Pharaoh? What if they don't believe me? But God reassures him. "I will be with you," he says. "And your brother Aaron will meet you. He will be your spokesperson." The mention of Aaron sparks a memory in Moses. He has not seen his brother in years, not since he fled Egypt. This promise ignites a flicker of hope in Moses' heart. After this powerful encounter, God instructs Moses to return to Egypt. Moses obeys and begins his journey back, filled with both fear and determination. As he approaches the wilderness, he sees a figure coming toward him, his brother Aaron. The two men run toward each other, their faces lighting up with joy and relief. They embrace, and in that moment the years apart fade away. "Moses," Aaron exclaims, his eyes wide with excitement. "I can't believe it's you." In excitement he kissed Moses. Moses, still catching his breath, shares the message from God, explaining the mission that has been entrusted to them. "God has chosen us to confront Pharaoh and deliver our people from bondage," Moses says, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Aaron nods, his heart racing with purpose. "I will stand by your side, brother. Together we will free the Israelites." Reunited, the brothers went to Egypt. In Egypt, they met with the Israelite elders to communicate God's message of liberation from slavery. God performed miraculous signs through Moses, including turning Moses' staff into a serpent and making his hand leprous and then healed. The elders believed their message and worshipped God. Following this, Moses and Aaron prepare to confront Pharaoh. They gather their courage, stand before the most powerful man in Egypt, Pharaoh, and demanded, "Thus says the Lord, let my people go." Pharaoh scoffs. "Who is this Lord that I should obey him?" Instead of setting the Hebrews free, he makes their lives even harder. The people cry out in despair, and Moses pleads with God. In response, God unleashed a series of plagues to show his power and compel Pharaoh to release the Israelites. One by one, Egypt is brought to its knees. First, the waters of the Nile turned to blood. Fish floated to the surface, and the people could no longer drink the water. Yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Then came swarms of frogs covering the land, leaping into homes, beds, and ovens. Even after Pharaoh begged Moses to remove them, he broke his promise to free the Israelites once the frogs were gone. Next, God sent gnats, tiny and relentless, swarming over humans and animals alike. Still Pharaoh refused. After the gnats came flies, buzzing and biting, filling the air in every corner of Egypt, spreading misery. But Pharaoh remained defiant. The fifth plague struck the livestock, and the fields were filled with the bodies of cattle, horses, sheep, and goats. Egypt's wealth and food supply dwindled, yet Pharaoh would not relent. Then boils broke out on the skin of the Egyptians, painful sores covering every man and woman. However, Pharaoh's heart grew harder still. Next came a devastating hailstorm, the likes of which Egypt had never seen. It flattened crops, killed animals, and shattered everything in its path. Pharaoh briefly repented but again refused to let the people go. Then locusts swarmed the land, devouring every green thing left after the hail. Egypt's fields were stripped bare and famine loomed. Pharaoh was shaken but remained stubborn. After the locusts, God sent darkness, a deep, oppressive darkness that lasted 3 days. No light shone in Egypt and fear gripped the land. But Pharaoh's heart would not soften. Finally, the last and most devastating plague came, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's palace to the poorest home. Even the firstborn of animals died. But God spared the Israelites, who marked their doorposts with lamb's blood as a sign of obedience. God instructed Moses to tell the Israelites to take a lamb for each household and to sacrifice it. They were to use a hyssop branch to apply the blood of the lamb to the doorposts and the lintel of their homes. This act was a sign for the Lord to pass over those houses during the final plague, ensuring that the firstborn in those homes would be spared from death. God emphasized that this marking of the door would be a protective sign, marking the Israelites as his people and delivering them from judgment. When Pharaoh's own son perished, his grief was overwhelming. Broken at last, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron in the middle of the night. "Go," he commanded. "Take your people and leave Egypt." Pharaoh, shattered by grief, finally gives in. "Go," he cries. "Take your people and leave." That very night, the Hebrews left Egypt, following a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. But Pharaoh's heart hardened once again, and he sent his army to chase them. Soon, the Hebrews found themselves trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's chariots. Terror swept through the people. "We are doomed," they cried. But Moses stood tall. "Do not be afraid. "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Moses raised his staff and cried out to God for help. God instructed him to stretch out his hand over the sea, causing it to part and create a path for the Israelites to escape. He raised his staff, and with a mighty wind, the sea parted, creating walls of water on either side. The people crossed safely on dry ground. But when Pharaoh's army followed, the waters crashed back, drowning them all. On the other side of the sea, the Hebrews sang songs of victory, praising God for their deliverance. Yet the journey had just begun. In the wilderness, the Israelites faced a harsh environment after their escape from Egypt. They struggled to trust God. They wandered for days, longing for food and water. Their hunger and thirst grew unbearable, and they began to grumble against Moses. "We are hungry. We are thirsty. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." In response to their cries, God heard their pleas and decided to provide for his people. Each morning as the sun began to rise, a miraculous sight unfolded. A fine, flaky substance appeared on the ground, glistening in the dawn light. It was manna, bread from heaven. The Israelites were astonished as they collected it, wondering what it was. Moses explained that it was God's provision, meant to sustain them on their journey. They learned to gather just enough for each day. One day, as the people grew increasingly parched, they found themselves near a rock in the dry wilderness. Desperate for water, they grumbled once more, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Questioning Moses about their fate. Again, at Meribah, God instructed Moses to speak to a rock to bring forth water. However, in his frustration with the people, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff instead of speaking to it as God commanded. Water gushed forth, refreshing and satisfying the thirsty crowd. Eventually they arrived at Mount Sinai, a towering and sacred mountain. Here, God called Moses to ascend the mountain to receive his laws. While Moses was on the mountain for 40 days and nights, God spoke to him, giving him detailed instructions for the Israelites, including the 10 Commandments, which would serve as a moral foundation for their community. But while Moses was on the mountain, the people grew restless. Fearing that Moses would not return, they approached Aaron, Moses' brother, demanding an idol to worship. Succumbing to their pressure, Aaron fashioned a golden calf, which the people began to worship, breaking their promise to follow God. When Moses descended from the mountain and saw the idolatry, he was filled with anger and heartbreak. In his hands were the tablets containing the commandments written by God. In his fury, he smashed the tablets on the ground. After confronting the people and holding them accountable for their actions, Moses interceded for them before God, pleading for mercy. In response to Moses' intercession, God instructed him to carve new tablets, and he renewed his covenant with the Israelites, giving them the 10 Commandments to guide their lives and their relationship with him. For 40 years the Hebrews wandered through the desert, learning to trust God with every step. At last they arrived at the border of the Promised Land, Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey. God took Moses to Mount Nebo and showed him the land of Canaan, the land promised to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Despite Moses' leadership and faithfulness, God told him, "You will see the land, but you will not enter it." Due to his earlier disobedience at Meribah, from the top of Mount Nebo, Moses gazed at the land he had longed to enter. With love and wisdom, Moses blessed the people and appointed Joshua to lead them into the Promised Land. Then on the quiet slopes of Mount Nebo, Moses breathed his last. God himself buried him, and to this day no one knows where his grave lies. And so, the story of Moses came to an end, but his legacy lived on. It's a story of courage, faith, and redemption. A reminder that no matter how daunting the journey, with God by our side, victory is always certain.
Do not miss out on the powerful lessons and inspiring stories we have in store, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Follow us for more captivating Bible adventures that will strengthen your faith and uplift your heart. Hit that subscribe button and join the Bible Storytime family today.